is brought to you by Head Start Basketball.
Hey Hoopheads, wanted to take a minute to shout out our partners and friends at Dr. Dish Basketball. We've had their partnership manager and training specialist Jefferson Mason and marketing manager Nick Bartlett on the show in the past, and we couldn't be more excited about what they're doing for the game of basketball. Their Dr. Dish shooting machines are undoubtedly the most advanced and user-friendly machines on the market, and truly accelerate skill development faster than ever. Beyond efficient reps, Dr. Dish provides training expertise and versatility designed to develop complete players. The new Dr. Dish CT machine has further revolutionized basketball training with over 150 plus on-demand individual and team workouts from some of the best coaches and trainers in the game. These workouts include video instruction and combine game-like shooting drills with ball handling, conditioning, and agility drills. Along with workouts, the Dr. Dish training management system also provides stat tracking and analytics to track progress and ensure accountability. These are just a few reasons why top programs like Duke, North Carolina, Louisville, Florida, Baylor, and countless others are upgrading to Dr. Dish. Learn more at drdishbasketball.com. Follow their incredible content at Dr. Dish B-Ball on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. And make sure you mention the Hoopheads podcast to get $300 off your next Dr. Dish purchase. That's a great deal, Hoopheads. Get out and get your Dr. Dish shooting machine today.
I remember the guy that was with him texted me like, "Hey, Kobe wants you to work him out." I'm like, "Great." And he was like, "All right, workout will start at like 5. So that's great. I said, like, we have dinner at like 6 or whatever, so I'll just miss that. He goes, No. It was 5 a.m. And so like the car picked me up at like 4:30, got UC Irvine 4:45. He's already there. We worked out for like 2 hours.
Mike Procopio is the director and president of the Hoop Consultants, as well as a brand ambassador for the basketball division of BSN Sports. Mike previously served as the director of player development for the Dallas Mavericks from 2013 to 2019. Prior to joining the Mavs, Procopio worked individually for Kobe Bryant, serving as his strategic game management coach, breaking down his game film, as well as giving him insight on upcoming opponents from 2009 to 2012, during which time Kobe and the Lakers won 2 NBA championships. Mike also worked under Tim Grover and Attack Athletics, serving as director of player development in NBA basketball, working with over 150 NBA players, implementing their on-court player development programs, as well as pre-draft on-court workouts from 2003 to 2013. Mike was an assistant coach for the Maine Red Claws of the NBDL, where he assisted in player development for all players on the roster from 2009 to 2010. Mike has been working Nike grassroots basketball camps and skills academies in both the USA and China since 1996. After you listen to our conversation with Mike Procopio, jump over to Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen and leave us a 5-star rating and review. To make sure you never miss an episode, subscribe right now and visit our website, hoopheadspod.com, to find every episode we've ever recorded. Let your friends and colleagues in the game know about the show so they can gain insights from some of the best minds in the game, from grassroots to the NBA. If you haven't grabbed your notebook, go get it now so you don't miss anything as you listen to our conversation with Mike Procopio from the Hoop Consultants. Hello and welcome to the Hoopheads podcast. It's Mike Linsing here with my co-host Jason Sunkel. And tonight we are pleased to welcome from the Hoop Consultants, Mike Procopio. Mike, welcome to the podcast.
How you doing, fellas?
We are great. We are very excited to have you on, get a chance to talk some hoops with you tonight and pick your brain about all the great things you've been able to do on the player development side of the game. And want to start by going back to when you had the first notion in your head that you wanted to become a basketball coach.
Yeah, that was a long time ago. It was a long time ago. Yeah, I was a regular kid, growing up in my neighborhood, right outside of Boston. Originally, I was born about 200 yards from the Boston Garden, and then moved to a suburb of Boston when I was in 2nd grade. And a normal kid played basketball, whatever, and knew from a very young age that I wouldn't be able to play it very long. So after high school, I decided I was going to be a manager and want to sort of try to learn about the game, stay involved in the game as much as I could. And, that the first year being a manager at Suffolk University, it's a Division III school inside of Boston. There was a coach by the name of James E. Nelson, who was the athletic director and coach, and one of my biggest mentors in life and in basketball. And just seeing how he sort of, he really took a caring and took with those kids. He really took just sort of besides basketball and life, and he was a great role model and had great influence on those guys. And he's a student of the game. He played under Bob Cousy at Boston College, and he's a very good player, but just a great human being. And I talk to him to this very day, and probably every couple of weeks we speak. But that sort of was a good influence of mine early on. And then I was always into the game. I was a scorekeeper at an outdoor men's league in my town. And in the summers, I would do that. It was probably like $50 a night or $40 a night or whatever.
Right.
And to me, they were high-level players. They were good basketball. And there was a referee who I got to know who was involved with this AAU team called the Boston Amateur Basketball Club. And back then in 1994, AAU was very, very small. It was it wasn't an open atmosphere as it is now, where anybody could play it. It was very exclusive, only for the really good players. And there was this team out of Boston that, had Chris Herron on it, a bunch of good players, had a couple of McDonald's All-Americans here and there, but would win national championship after national championship. And again, no internet really back then, and no video online. It just sort of, you show up at these gyms and they had these tournaments. And so he got me involved in that. There was a guy named Leo Papil who started the team in the 1970s. He was assistant with Rick Pitino at Boston University. He was actually at Suffolk University as an assistant long before I was there, and he was an assistant with Kevin Mackey at Cleveland State up at your neck of the woods. And he back when they beat Indiana, to go to the, I think, Sweet 16, and he was a part of that staff. And so he was just a basketball guy, and I learned so much about player evaluation and sort of how to run a team. I mean, he put it together like an NBA team as far as like running a system. He had the run of the mill players in Boston, so there wasn't much competition. There was only a few teams, so he put together his roster, and just sort of how he would talk, and have late nights talking to him, spending it on the road. We would travel a little bit, and he taught me a lot about the game. So from there, we were Nike sponsored, one of 16 AAU teams that was sponsored by Nike. So he got me involved with the Nike All-American Camp, and that's where I met George Raveling, longtime college coach and a high executive at Nike. So he got me involved with with the Nike All-American Camp, and it was one of the best camps in the country. The best of the best would go, and they would have these college workouts. I was a coach for the high school guys, and they had these college workouts, and I always just sort of watching, and I would work some of our guys out in the off season and be involved with that, but really watching some guys at work. There were two guys that ended up being my mentors in the player development side. A guy named Tate Slock that was head coach at Army, and Miami of Ohio and Clemson. Actually, Bobby Knight worked for him at Army, and a guy named Herb Livesey who started Snow Valley. And so I got a chance to see those guys work and work guys out, and the way they, there was nothing like I've ever seen before. And right then I was like, this is what I want to do. I want to work with players. I mean, just sort of how they put them in drills, and they weren't just the regular like John Wooden, old school drills. They were like, moving and multiple players, and sort of had a real purpose, teaching footwork and positions and teaching and stopping and correcting. And I talked to George right after that, and I was like, George, this is I'd rather be with the college guys, if I come back next year. And and that's sort of where it happened. I would being around Leo and his team, and then those guys in the summer. And then I met a guy named Dave Severns a couple years later, who got me involved with Herb and working Snow Valley out in California. And Dave's one of my best friends. He works for the Clippers, and obviously people who listen to the show saw, I heard his deal a couple of weeks ago. And Dave's a lifelong friend for over 20 years now, and just sort of that cocoon of people that would sort of teach me, how to make players better. And I really got lucky from that. And then my guy Leo got a job with Rick Pitino when Rick took over at the Celtics in '97. They named him head scout of the Celtics, so he got me involved working some players out. I got a chance to work guys like Bruce Bowen out and be around Rick Pitino a little bit. I didn't work for the team, but I let them. I got them in at Suffolk University when Rick wanted to do pre-draft workouts and some secret workouts where media wouldn't be around and there wasn't really much access. So I got a chance to see Rick work guys out, and Pitino by far, I think he's one of the best coaches of all, if not the best coach of all time, just because he made so many average teams high level. If you watch Boston University, Providence, Kentucky, because he took over when they were on the death penalty, the Knicks, and even the Celtics, his first year sort of jumped their performance a little bit. And then obviously he didn't have great success after that in Boston. But watching him work out players and the way he could communicate and, correct and stop and have presence and look guys in the eye and just sort of, he could praise them or rip them a new one in the same tone. And those guys really played hard for him, and he could get the best out of his players. So I really, I call myself the fat Forrest Gump because I got a chance to have access to things that no one really, look, I didn't play. I look, I'm overweight, short, can't play. To be able to have the access that I had at that age and be able to learn from the people that I learned from, it was, remarkable for me. And it was a great deal. And Herb Livesey was like, you don't understand how much influence he's had on me as well. Like, he was a scout of the Trailblazers when I was younger. I was like 20, I want to say I was like 24, and he would send me so many things by email, how to evaluate players and not only work players out, but evaluate them. He'd be like, look, if you had a first round pick, would you do that or trade it for Matt Maloney coming into a contract year? Or would you go forward with Matt Maloney, or would you keep the first round pick? And if you're going to draft between 15 and 22, so things like that, where I had to really think and email him back. And he was an English teacher, so he would correct my grammar, and but like he would teach me about the evaluation side. I would continue to learn for the player development side, and I think one definitely has to do with the other. I think if I'm a scout, I would definitely want to know about player development, because when I'm evaluating a player and saying, okay, in 3 years through a player development program, he could become this. Or if I'm a player development coach, I would need to be able to evaluate, because, I would need to know how, this position need these skill sets. He's going to need to know how to do this. So, to be, a top 20 player at his position, you're taking a guy who maybe can't really shoot the ball from three, and, knowing player development, saying, look, in a good player development program, he could become a 36% NBA three-point shooter by year 2 or year 3. And I think if you're a player development guy, needing to know how to evaluate players, so well, if he wants to become a top 20 player at his position, he needs to be able to do X, Y, and Z, or he's not going to be able to be in this spot. So I was very lucky to be able to have Herb, and then be able to work for the Celtics as a scout under Danny Ainge and Chris Wallace for 4 years, and be able to not only be in player development, but also work for an NBA team and evaluating and scouting and learning from there. And then, working for Tim Grover for 10 years in Chicago, working out NBA players in the offseason, and then, working for Kobe, and then obviously getting a job with the Mavericks. I think I've been very fortunate to be able to do what I've done, being a guy who really who's never played, doesn't look the part. I think that somebody like me will be really hard to do what I've done now, because of so many, the requirement, most of these things, to be able to play and, have, be a division, be a college player or what have you to get in this business, or have some type of a playing background. I think it would have been really hard for me. I probably wouldn't have been able to do half the things I've done in 2019 that I did in 1996 and 1995 starting out.
Yeah, understood. So talk a little bit about, I think what jumps out at me there is, obviously just the great list of names that you've been able to be influenced by over the course of your career.
Sure.
And so let's take that a step further and maybe generalize it and just talk a little bit about maybe to a young coach who's out there about how important it is to build your network, to build relationships, to make sure that in whatever position that you're in currently, that you're doing the best job you possibly can so that somebody else out there who is part of your network or you do have a relationship with feels confident enough in you to recommend you for the next opportunity. So maybe just talk a little bit about, from a young coach's perspective, how important that network, those relationships are.
I think it's tremendously important to be able to network and know people, especially in today's age, because it's so saturated. There's so many people trying to get into the sport and they have access because of social media and the internet and things of that nature. So yes, networking is very important to be able to meet people and sort of get to know them, where they could sort of you could bring value to them, and to be able to them help you in the long run. I think one thing that young coaches need to understand now, though, is you need to be able to hone your craft, and you got to be able to bring value to a relationship. Meaning, like, hey, I'm Johnny. I really like basketball, and I want to work in the NBA, and I work 15 hours a day. Well, yeah, no shit. Everybody can do that. Anybody can work hard. And if you're just asking for things like, hey, can I work for you, or can I get an internship with you? And George Raveling taught me this, where he's like, look, when you meet somebody, you got to nurture a relationship. You can't expect, do all this stuff for somebody to sort of scare them off right off the bat, or ask for something right off the bat. You need to bring value, and you need to sort of nurture that relationship over time. So what I would say to people, yes, meet as many people as you can. That's important. But you can't forget the fact that you need to bring value, because, look, nobody does something for nothing these days. No one's going to really help you unless you could help them. So for me, it was always knowing my area, scouting, and for high school players and college players. If I was talking to a college coach, I always sort of had a running ranking of players in my area. Say, look, are you looking at this player or that player? I think this guy could be good. Or can I work your team out for free in the summertime? I wanted to hone my craft. I thought and I never really spoke like this until I was ready, and I had something to bring to the table. And then I could sort of impress them with my work, but also try to bring them value and say, look, are you having issues with your players, with footwork or with this or with that? Can I help you with something? And I always want to try to offer something instead of just asking for all these people for things, especially if they don't know you from Adam. So I think honing your craft, having value, bringing value to a situation, and then try to nurture relationships from the start, and to impress people without asking them for something right off the bat. I think that, now look, I'm not the best networker in the world. I'm probably on the other end of it. But I think that for young coaches today, there are so many young guys running around trying to get jobs that they put all this work into the networking, which they need to. Don't get me wrong, it's important. But they don't do anything on their craft side except, I'm going to work 18 hours a day. That is the most overrated phrase that you could ever tell somebody. Like when I was with the Mavericks and I started their player development internship, which is the biggest in the league, we would get probably like 1,200 to 1,500 resumes, and everybody was like, "Well, I'll work so hard. Like, yeah, no, I mean that should be expected.
Right. That's not even that shouldn't be a characteristic that you're highlighting, right?
Exactly. So, but I think networking is definitely important. I think you can't just spend all your time honing your craft without networking to get ahead. But I think it needs to be sort of really close to the middle, where you have something to, you sort of pick some part of the game that you really want to be good at. Offense, defense, player development, film study, out of bounds plays, ATOs, and then you just sort of bury yourself in that. And then you try to meet people and say, and try to strike up these conversations and try to show them what you know, and build those relationships from there. I think that's always what I've done. And I've always tried to over deliver, and undersell myself and over deliver. And I think those things are important where, I don't care about your resume being laminated and, doing all this and sending sending a pizza with one slice missing, saying that I'm your missing piece. I mean, I think people put so much time and effort into the selling themselves, and they don't put enough time into actually knowing their craft.
All right, so I want to double back and ask you two things. One directly related to you, and then the second one is more of a general question. So just related directly to you, as you've sort of described, you say, I didn't fit the part.
Sure.
And so as a result of that, how did you develop the confidence? I know the answer, but I want to hear you verbalize it. How did you develop the confidence to be able to go in front of NBA guys, to go in front of NBA coaches, to go in front of Rick Pitino and do some of the things that you were able to do? How did you develop that confidence that you would be able to, as you said, deliver the goods here to the players and be able to provide value to a player or a coach or a general manager or whoever it was that you were getting in front of?
I think, Mike, what I was able to do is make a lot of mistakes with a lot of high school players and college players that I worked out thousands and thousands of hours before I even met Rick and I had met these people. So I dove into any book that I could, any coaching book, watching as much game film that I could. And obviously you had to, record it with a VCR back then. And
a little different
then, where you could just pop on YouTube these days and do that.
So you're saying you worked hard, man.
What's up?
You worked hard to go back what you said earlier, but you actually made it like beneficial.
Yeah. And there was a lot of bad workouts of mine early on. And the one thing that I honed in early, though, is presence of players. So I always wanted to make sure I could look them in the eye and tell them the truth and be able to do that. And it's just the thousands of hours, there's countless hours of working out Division III players, Division II players, high school kids, and just sort of honing things in. And one of my best friends is a guy by the name of Dave Hopla, who's one of the best shooting instructors, if not the best shooting instructor in the world. And I met him when I was like 11 years old at a camp down in Cape Cod, Massachusetts, championship basketball school, and learning like how to teach shooting from him, and working 12 weeks of basketball camp in the summertime all over the East Coast, and trying to really just teach kids and learn. And this way, I don't think you're ever ready when you first meet these NBA guys and what have you. I don't think you're ever ready for that, but I think you're the best that you could. But I'm cut from a different cloth. Like, I shut up, I listen. I never really made a spectacle of myself. It was never really about me. I always just want to be around basketball. And look, if I could have been a JV coach, varsity coach in Revere High, helped out with the BABC and sort of worked some camps in the summer without ever working in the NBA, I would have always been good with that. Basketball is basketball. I think if you're working with a high school kid or an NBA guy, it's the same. And the only thing it's not, the only thing that's different, obviously, is your expectation of the player, the talent, and all that. But what you teach, for the most part, skill-wise, shooting it, passing it, dribbling it, game reads, and things like that, it's all the same, except, obviously the level of player you're working with. But, it just, for me, I just always want to be around the game. And I was just lucky, like I said, I didn't look the part. I'm a mutant, and I'm good with that. And, I'm very comfortable in my skin. But then again, I'm probably in the top 1% in the fact that I can look any type of player in the eye and tell them the truth. And, a lot of guys can't do that. They could do it with the lesser player. They can't do it with the franchise player. They can't do it with, an all-star. They can't do it with a roughneck player that they bring in that had a tough background. I could do it with anyone, just because of the fact that I was able to do it at the high school level with high-level players that were McDonald's All-American, Division I player, scholarship player, all the way down. And I think you can't just say, I want to work with only NBA players. And that's you watch a lot of trainers and things like that they want to just work with NBA guys. I think that's an unrealistic expectation, considering there's only about 510 players on NBA rosters. and there's about 18,321 trainers that say they're NBA player development coaches. So it's tough, but I think you have to cut your teeth with as many players as you can and get that experience.
All right. So how did you develop the ability to tell every different level of player the truth? Do you think that that's something that part of it came naturally to you as part of your personality? Part of it was developed? How would you, I guess it's the nature versus nurture question.
Yeah.
In terms of how do you splice that out?
Well, first of all, I come from a long line of ball busters. I mean, and that's what we do. We always would bust each other. I mean, in Boston, that's just what we do. I just being around people, talking, telling them the truth, telling them all that stuff, and then having the people that I was around, like Leo Papille. Again, you may not know him, but like he's as far as the AAU level, he's one of the longest tenured AAU coach in the country, and just he was able to tell all these players, look him in the eye and tell them what they needed to do. Watching Tate Slock do that all the time. Watching Tim Grover do that all the time. Tim was the best I've ever seen at it, and that's why Tim was by far the best boss that I've ever had, and because he didn't have time to lie to guys, and he just told it the way it was. We had clients at Attack in Chicago where they were paying him like $35,000 a summer to work out with him. And one guy one day was, giving the refs crap. They had games that like we work them out in the morning. They would lift. They would work out with us in the morning on the court, and then we'd all play at like 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the afternoon with NBA referees. And he would give just one guy was given a problem, took his $35,000 check, ripped it up, and gave it to him, and said, "Look, we're not taking this here." And that's real culture. There are two types of cultures these days. I hate that word, by the way, but there's teams are people that have that culture, and there's teams that have signs in their locker room that say they have culture. You could talk about it all you want, but that guy lived it and walked it every day, and it was great. And I learned so much from Tim and Leo and Tate Slock and Herb Livesey. Those guys, they could tell players the truth, and I think I was just lucky enough to have those mentors of people that really did it the right way as far as teaching the game.
Yeah, and I think the grassroots basketball system that we have today makes it more difficult for people to tell the truth, because if you're an AAU coach or you're an AAU club and you tell your player the truth, he's going to the club down the street.
No doubt.
Then that money's walking out the door. So there's that problem. And then I think if you're a high school coach, you run into that same problem. It takes somebody who has a real strength of character and also has, I think a pretty established program. Because again, if I tell my best player, hey, you're not going to make it at the college level unless you do X, Y, and Z, that player's going to, their parent, they're going to look at that high school coach and say, well, I can just go to the high school down the street. And
no doubt.
There's so much transfer and that stuff. And it's one of the things that I really dislike about the system that we have is just there's so much of that telling everybody they're great. And, you see it on social media all the time. And it just leads to this whole, again, I'm going to use that word, culture, where guys never hear the truth. And we had Coach Showalter on, and one of the greatest things he said to us was, hey, when they come to us at USA Basketball, this may be the first time that anybody's ever critiqued their game and the first time that they've ever heard the truth. And, we just think, well, they can't transfer from USA Basketball. There's nowhere else for them to go.
No doubt.
So, I think that that's something that if you're really serious about being a good player, and I don't care if you're an eighth grader, you're a high school All-American, you're a college player, you're an NBA guy, if you really care about getting better, you want somebody there that's going to tell you the truth. And unfortunately, our basketball culture doesn't provide for that. It makes kids go the other way and seek out people who are yes men as opposed to people who are truth tellers.
Yeah, I mean, that's just the reality of what you have. And my sort of background in it and my experience is if you get everybody together and you tell them, look, and you got to just, I think it has to be open communication and constant feedback. And sometimes you got to give players some rope and sometimes you got to pull it back. And it's definitely not an easy task to do this, and it's finicky, and you don't want to be one of those guys who harps on him all the time and screams at him and throws chairs, but you can't be that guy. First of all, you got to be consistent in the way you are, and it can't be result based, and you got to have rules that everybody follows, and you have to look yourself in the mirror and say, look, am I going to do this the right way, or am I not? And that's the big question you have to ask yourself. Look, there's a lot of money in basketball. There's a lot of money on all levels. You can make it, not coach in high school, unfortunately, but AAU, training, college, NBA. And, look, I'm not going to be mad at somebody who wants to lie to players for a living who's making $300,000 or $400,000 a year. There's plenty of them. There's plenty of them in college. There's plenty of them in the NBA. There's plenty of trainers who do that. But look, I think you sort of make that promise early on. You either sell your soul to the devil, or you can look yourself in the mirror and say, you know what? I'm going to hold everybody truthfully accountable. On the court, I'll give my best players the biggest leashes, and you let those guys take the tougher shots sometimes. But as far as as a team, respect for the game, being invested in the game, being professional is how they act. And sometimes they're going to make mistakes along the way, but everyone has to be accountable at the same level at that point, or you just, you got to suck it up and just take it. And I just, I have nothing against those people who do that, but I just can't. I've never been that way. I've never been that way. I'll never will be that way. And I think you have to do it a certain way, and you have to be comfortable enough with yourself to be able to sort of tell players the truth all the time.
As you've listened to the Hoopheads podcast, one common topic that continually comes up in our conversations is character. I'm fortunate to be associated with the Positive Coaching Alliance, a national nonprofit movement that provides valuable tools, training, and resources for coaches, athletes, parents, and administrators that is centered around sports and educational psychology and organizational behavior research. PCA combines this research with practical advice from a national advisory board of top pro and college athletes and coaches who utilize PCA principles at the highest levels of competition. Through a partnership with our local Cleveland chapter of the PCA, we are pleased to offer a discount code to allow you, our listeners, to take a PCA online course for just $20. To take advantage of this offer, visit the store on positivecoach.org and enter the discount code HoopHeads20. That's HoopHeads20 with 2 capital H's. Coaches, I hope you'll take advantage of this great offer from the Positive Coaching Alliance and help us continue to grow the game.
I think in Dallas, with the Mavericks, I thought the best thing that, first of all, in player development, there's so many people involved in the player development situation with the team. I don't think you could pat yourself on the back and take credit for all of it. There's strength coaches, there's trainers, there's assistant coaches, there's a head coach, there's a guy that works the player out every day. There's so many people that have something to do with a player development of a player. But with the Mavericks, I thought, before I got there, the biggest issue was the development of young players that were late picks, that were second round undrafted or free agents that lost their way, not sort of making it to that second contract. So the one thing that I wanted to do is make sure that I communicated their role through what the head coach wanted. And I told them, look, you could try to be A, B, and C, but it's not going to happen. When you go to a situation like Dallas where you're playing off Dirk Nowitzki, you're playing off Vince Carter, you're playing off of, Wesley Matthews, so there was like 3 or 4 players that were already set. So if you were a rookie, at very best, you were the 4th and a half to 5th best player on the court. And they came in being the LeBron James of their college team. They were the ones getting all the plays called to them, and they could take as many wild shots as possible, and they were ISO guys. When they got into the NBA and you have to play off of 3 or 4 of the people, and they had got to be the 5th option, you have to be a role player and say, look, you could try to do all this. And probably I probably overstepped my boundary here, but I'm like, look, we're probably going to cut or trade you. And that's probably the truth if you want to continue to play the way you want to play. But if you do this every day, first of all, you got to be a professional, because we're developing you for us or somebody else. So you got to be a professional in this game and be invested in it. Meaning, in Dallas, you had to be there 90 minutes early. We put this in after I got there, 90 minutes early to practice, where you had enough time to eat, do your treatment with the trainers, work with the strength coach, get your shots up, watch film with the coaches. So you're there 90 minutes early. And even if you're a good player or not, your head coach rolls through the locker room, they see you there 90 minutes early. It sort of gives you some type of equity with the coach. So first of all, you taught your profession to be a professional. You had to know all the names of the people who were in the travel party, things like that. You had to say hello to everyone. You had to look people in the eye. And then you learned your craft and say, look, these are the 2 things that the coach needs you to do. Not 10, but the 2 things that you got to be able to cut. You got to be able to make an open shot. You got to be able to guard people. You need to know your plays. And I thought we had very good success with that. We had, Al Farouk Aminu, who after 1 year signed a big deal with Portland. We had Dwight Powell, Dorian Finney-Smith, Maxi Kleber, Salah Mejri, a bunch of players that were, second round picks, guys who lost their, veterans that lost their way and really didn't have a place in the league yet, and be able to sort of communicate that to them about what they need to do to be successful and hold them accountable when they didn't, and meet with them all the time and talk to them all the time and continue to just stress those things. They had a lot of players that signed second and third deals based on building from being a role player and then building up from that. Because you got so many guys working with players in the summertime telling them, oh, well, your coach just wants to be a role player. No, that's not right. They're holding you back. They're sort of like snake oil salesmen or, dope dealers, to be honest, because they're playing off their ego, which is easy. First of all, it's one of the most cruelest things you could do to a basketball player. Second of all, it just ruins their chances. So be able to take players that were 9, 10, 11, 12 on your depth chart and bring them up to 7, 8, 9, 10. I think for me, that's what true player development is. And I think you set yourself up to be a good organization, a winning organization, when now you could turn these players into rotation players within 2 or 3 years. And now you have a stable of these guys every 3 or 4 years. And then you could add your free agent to that. But I think you just need a plan in place. You can't just have these guys on the court, work them out for an hour a day and leave them alone. You got to constantly talk to them, constantly meet with them, constantly check in, constantly talk to the coaches and say, look, what does John need to do to get on the floor, and have that talk. The worst thing that you could do as a coach, as a head coach, or even assistant coach, they all do it. In meetings, they bitch about players. Johnny doesn't roll, and I would always raise my hand. I'll be like, did anyone tell Johnny he needs to roll? And they're like, no, he needs to be able to know that. I go, no, he doesn't. I said, that's what we do. Now, if we tell Johnny he needs to roll and he doesn't roll, that's on him. But if he wants to be successful with our team and help us win, and he needs to roll and he's not doing it and no one's telling him about it, that's a problem. We need to tell them exactly what we need out of them and what they're not doing and what they are doing. And we need to be able to figure this thing out. And it's hard enough as a young player in this league, when you come in, because a year after the draft, there's going to be 60 more players. There's going to be 48 of those players are going to make it. There's going to be 5 or 6 players coming from overseas that are, that are veterans that are signing. So that's like 50 plus jobs. Plus you got all these two-way players that go in and out of teams. So there's going to be 50 new players, 50 jobs that are lost. And what happens is after year 1 or year 2, it's like knowing the prom queen who was a prom queen in 1999. Nobody knows and nobody cares. You're out of sight, out of mind. After the draft, you're a ticking time bomb. If you can't get something going in the first 8 to 14 months, 15 months as an NBA player, and if you're not drafted in the lottery, it's really hard to make it, because then you become one of those guys who's thrown in a trade, and then you got 2 or 3, 4 years, you're on 5 or 6 teams, and once you start getting traded, that team that you go to isn't really invested in you. They're not invested in you really. They didn't draft you. They didn't scout you. You were thrown in a trade usually. And they're like, all right, we'll give him a chance, but we already have 2 players that are ahead of him that we drafted and been with us for 4 or 5 years. We'd rather go with them, but let's see what they got. And then if they get traded again, it's almost, if you reach like your 3rd team and you haven't made it yet, there are only guys like Chauncey Billups and Ben Wallace and guys like that were able to do it. It's really hard to get your footing that way. So, that's
I love what you said. Here's what jumped out at me from that is when I hear player development, I think of on-court player development. So when I think of you as being the director of player development for the Mavericks, I think of what you're doing out on the floor. So I think of, you're having conversations with the head coach. Hey, what does this guy need to be able to do? All right, I'm going to work with him on that and this. But what I loved about what you said is that part of your job was not only to develop them as a player on the floor, but as a player, a professional basketball player, and what that means in terms of how they go about doing their business down to, I love how you mentioned just telling them, hey, you got to know everybody's name who you're interacting with all the time and say hello to those people. And that stuff, I think, is something that transcends professional basketball, and it travels down to second grade basketball where, I think that sometimes, and this is one of the frustrations that I have with youth basketball coaches in a lot of cases, is we spend so much time and so much energy focused on trying to win a tournament when we're in fourth grade or in fifth grade. And we don't take the time to develop our kids who are on our teams as people and teach them how to shake a coach's hand when they come into practice, or how to be a good teammate. And that's stuff that, to hear it coming from you as somebody who worked with players at the highest level is refreshing. And I think that if that message could get out there, if we could somehow convey that and educate parents, which I think is one of the biggest challenges that we have, is how do we make parents understand what the whole basketball experience should be about? Because even if your kid makes it to the NBA, they're going to need all those people skills, and the ability to be a good person is going to help them no matter whether they're an accountant, a teacher, or an NBA player. And even if they are an NBA player, a lot of those careers are really, really short, as you just described. And even if you have a long career and you retire when you're 40, you still have more than half your life to live as a human being. And to me, that was eye-opening to hear you talk about the fact that it wasn't just on-court player development. It's the complete, total package of a human being that you were working on.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a struggle every day, and you can't just, in my opinion, player development, you really can't just work a player out and then say, "Oh, I'll see you tomorrow," because now look, being in the NBA versus high school and whatever, the NBA, it's all you do is basketball. So that's a lot easier for me to say that rather than a high school coach that is working two jobs and teaching and maybe bartending at night. So it's hard sometimes you don't have the time. But we had a sports psychologist named Don Cockstein, who's by far the best in sports psychology that I've ever seen. And he actually put this rule in, and him and I worked hand in hand in the off-court player development with the players as well. I did a lot of on-court as well, but the off-court we really put a lot of work into. He had this rule that, and I know you can't replicate it in high school and junior high school and whatnot, but I think it's something that could be done on some other way. Every time we traveled, so say we went to Cleveland, right, from Dallas, we get into Cleveland at the hotel at 5. Our rule is anybody in player development is going to be the first 3 years of their career. It didn't mean if it was Luka Doncic or Johnny Doncic, anywhere in between. If you're in the first 3 years, you're in player development. You're a developing player in the Mavs system. So what we did was anybody that was in the player development system, the night we got in, so we get in around 5, we met with every player in that program for 15 minutes in our hotel room individually with Don and myself, and we would talk. And we'd say, first of all, we'd say, how you doing? And we would talk about, tell us what's going on. Good, bad, ugly, whatever you want to share. And it's going to stay in this room. We're not going to talk to the coaches about it. We're not going to talk to anybody about it. We're going to just talk. And then they'll say, okay, and they'll say, all right, how about basketball? What's going on? What's the highs? What's the lows? And I'll be like, look, and then after he would talk, we would say, look, I talked to the coaches. This is what they're saying. This is what they need you to do better. This is what they think you're doing well. And this is what I'm seeing. And let's talk. And we would hash out a lot of stuff. At least now we travel a lot in the league, and it's only the first night of a road trip. So it could be 5-game road trip. We're only going the first night. but we would almost guarantee that we'd meet every 10 days. And, and we would meet much more than that, but we would at least get face to face for 15 minutes every 10 days and have a scout session of what's going on in their life and on the court and off the court and whatever they wanted to share. We had a lot of players that shared a lot. We had a lot of players that didn't share that much, but we would at least communicate and talk, and you're not just leaving them on an island by themselves. So I think like if I'm a high school coach, even if it's like texting or meeting in my office before practice, I want to face-to-face talk to every player on my team every 10 or 12 days. There shouldn't be 10 or 12 days where we don't sit down one-on-one and talking. And I think, especially these days with players and depression and mental health and all that, I think you should be able to talk to your players and have a conversation. Now, younger the player, it's probably going to be tougher for them to talk and communicate, but at least try to say, look, what do you want to talk about? And be ready for maybe them being upset at you or you being upset at them, but at least you're communicating your thoughts, they're communicating theirs, and you're trying to help them the best you can.
I think those relationships are really important. Those coach-player relationships are really important. We've had a ton of high school coaches and small college coaches, Division III coaches on here that have talked to us about how important they feel it is for them to get to know their players, not just as players, but as people off the court. And, I can go through a whole list of people who told us that when they know their players better and their players know that they care about them, not just as a person who can put the ball through the basket, but as a real human being, and that their coach cares about them and wants to know about their family life, wants to know about how they're doing in school, wants to know about their girlfriend or boyfriend, that it makes a difference when they then go and, as you said, tell the truth and hold the kid accountable. That kid now knows that the coach is coming from a place of caring.
Yeah.
And if you haven't built that relationship, if you haven't taken the time to talk to your players, it makes it, I think, really, really hard. Now, maybe if you go back 30 years ago when you had more of the old fire and brimstone style of coaching where those relationships weren't as important, or they probably were still just as important, but it wasn't as prevalent. That style of coaching, the relationship style of coaching, maybe wasn't as prevalent then as it is now. Mm-hmm. I think that it's difficult to get the best out of today's athlete, I think, if you haven't built a relationship with them. I just think it is. And I think that carries over not just from the NBA, but I think that goes all the way down to, I coach my daughter's 4th grade travel team. And I think it's important for me to know those kids. Mm-hmm. So, we'll do communication activities, and we'll do things where we're talking to each other. And I've done it with my older kids, and all that stuff helps to build connections between you as the coach and your players. But then it also helps if you do some team building things and you build in communication into that. It also helps to foster better relationships between teammates. And when you create those bonds between player to player and then coach to player, I think you end up getting better results, and everybody's happier too. And that goes to what you said about mental health and just how people are, what they're getting out of the game. And that's really what it comes down to.
I think you have to care. You got so many coaches that just treat these players like they're X's and O's on a board, or, they try to deal with issues through John Wooden quotes, instead of actually talking to the people like people, because they are people. First of all, I'm not gonna say any John Wooden quote unless Sam Gilbert's quoted in there too with the money he used to pay those guys. But what I want to do is
wait. But so, all right, so we're in the college basketball shady era. Well, not it's always been shady, but yeah, you think about the Sam Gilbert story, and I don't know that that's common knowledge out there, in terms of what was going on there at UCLA with Wooden and potential for.
Yeah, here's my thing. They wanna sort of condemn Jerry Tarkanian, and look, we all know what was happening at UNLV. That's fine, but they want to look the other way with the guys like John Wooden. No offense, look, John Wooden, taught so many coaches, and that pyramid of success is great. But that pyramid of success probably cost him about $500,000 in payments to Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Bill Walton, these other guys. So I'm cool with it. But if you want to be, I'm a big transparency guy. So if you want to kill Jerry Tarkanian, you gotta talk about that guy too, because people because of that pyramid, and so many people like to talk. And look, the guy's had some great quotes out there, but it's a lot.
Sure.
It's a lot better. It's a lot easier to have those quotes when you have a bigger salary cap than the Boston Celtics when you're winning championships in college. So, we didn't go to talk about that, but anyways, but
understood.
What I'm saying is treat those players like humans and talk to them and really sort of look them in the eye. And look, they're not always going to agree with you. As much as a good place you're coming from, players aren't going to agree with you. You're going to get that player that doesn't care what you have to say. All they want is their numbers. All they want is the minutes, and all they want is shots. So, and parents, we're talking about parents all the time too. Look, it's their kid, and I've got 2 kids myself, but I've dealt with parents since I was, playing when I was 8 years old, and I know how crazy parents can get, and because it's their own kid and they don't want to hear it. And again, they're like the players; they just want to go to somebody that's going to tell them what they want to hear. That Johnny can play at UCLA. They don't want to hear it, but you got to at least give them a chance and tell them the truth and tell them where you're coming from. You got to talk to the player, get to know them, because you're going to have those tough conversations. And it's a lot easier to go through those wars when those players know what they care about. You care about them. Not just care about them, because this happens a lot too in the NBA. It's the worst in the NBA. If a player's not playing well or down on the bench, no one cares about him for the most part. No one wants to work him out. No one's really talking to him every day. But God forbid they get thrown into a game against Phoenix in the middle of January when you're down 28 in the first half, and then that player hits 7 threes. Now everybody wants to work him out. Everybody wants to care about him. Everybody wants to love him. You got to be consistent with a player if they drop 4 or 44 and everything in between. And you got to stay the same regardless of how they're playing, because they sniff that stuff out too. You got to be able to be consistent with players. I think that if you're not, and you're just jumping on them when they're great, and then when they, I've had players like this on championship NBA teams where a guy would work them out before games, and this coach would only work out like the best players in the team. And this player was a starter in the beginning of the year, and this guy was working him out. And then this guy fell to the second unit, and he wouldn't work him out anymore. You get a lot of that where if you're playing well or a player's playing well, everybody loves them. But then when they're not playing well, everybody scatters, like it's Chernobyl or something.
Right.
And they're radioactive. I think you've got to be consistent. And it doesn't matter. That's why, at the end in Dallas, I had a great relationship with Doncic and stuff, but I could care less about working him out or not. I wanted to talk to him. But I would rather work out the end of the bench guys, the guys that I could really try to help and talk to, and because I knew that they weren't the most popular guys. I would rather do it with those guys, and because you feel so good that when they do well or when they not, you just treat them the same. But you definitely notice when those guys play well that they get a little bit more attention from everybody else. When they're not getting that attention when they're not playing well. I'd rather develop a guy at the end of the bench. I'm not one of these guys who just wants to work out NBA All-Stars all the time and pat myself in the back. I mean, come on. Imagine working out, and I don't want to name names because I know trainers are connected to the guys, but imagine you working out an NBA All-Star. That's first team. You get a first-team NBA All-Star 8 years in a row, first-team All-NBA, and you work him out, and you pat him on the back. You know what it's like? That's like saying I'm Dominique Wilkins as a jump coach. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
I mean, come on.
Exactly.
You know who developed that guy? God did.
Yep.
I want to know the trainers that are working with the 10th guy on the bench and making him an 8th guy and be like, what? I respect that guy, not the guy who just works with great players all the time, and says, I did something. Come on, man. It's
I think there's definitely something to be said for that. There's definitely a culture out there where a culture of self-promotion, let's call it.
Sure.
And you understand it because in order to make a living, in a lot of cases, you have to be willing to be slightly a self-promoter to kind of get somewhere and to get bigger name clients and
Sure.
all that kind of stuff, which we all understand. And yet, I think when I hear you talk and when I think about where the satisfaction lies in coaching, I think it really does come from can I make a difference? Can I make a difference with this player? Can I make a difference with this team? Does my presence as a coach make this player better? Does it make this team better?
Mm-hmm.
And then can I see those tangible results by, as you said, maybe a guy moving up from being out of the rotation to suddenly he's in the rotation, or I have a team that most people think's a 500 team and I can get that team to play, 600 ball instead of 500 ball. And that's really where I think the value of a coach, however you want to define coach, whether it's player development or whether it's, the coaching a team, whatever. I think that's really where the true value lies. And I think if you are truly a basketball person, that's where your satisfaction lies too as a coach. And that's what I hear you saying.
Yeah, I mean, just like you see all this nonsense online, right? Like watching guys work out and whatever, and everything's ball dominant. And if you really want to be a young coach in this thing and be really good, well, do a study. And I already did the study. There's 510 players in the NBA. And again, I don't want to like name drop the NBA all day, but it's just sort of something I've been in for a while. But 510 players in the NBA. There's 105 that get 10 shots or more. Okay? So 405 guys in the NBA are not getting plays called to them. Now, 450 are really on rosters, and there's another 60 that are two-way players. But understand that most players in the NBA, 78% of NBA players don't get plays called for them. So they've got to be cutters and defenders and spot up shooters, and they gotta be sloppy second, sloppy third, sloppy fourth guys. So learn how to teach guys to play or girls to play off the ball. Like teach them how to have one skill to get into a game, not necessarily being an ISO player. And probably some of those 405 players in the league, maybe some of them are ISO guys in small minutes, but for the most part, there's two players in every team, sometimes three that dominate the shots, and everyone else has to sort of play off the ball. So start teaching players how to cut, how to get into the paint, straight line drive into the paint, and either finish or make a play for somebody else. Teach that big man how to set great screens, roll to the rim, catch it, get two bumping him on the roll, and be able to make that pass to the open shooter in the corner. Teach those skills, because those are winning basketball players. And if you're not a winning player, look, in the NBA, there's about 70 players that matter, 80 players that matter tops. Everybody else, it's like rearranging the deck chairs of the Titanic. It doesn't matter. So you need to be able to make it in any level, high school, college, professional. You got to be somebody who can play off the ball. You got to be somebody who can make winning plays. And you got to be that player that a coach could depend on. Because it's really hard to make it, man. It really is. It's hard because teams are constantly trying to get better. You're always on the trading block. So many young players that I work with in Dallas, we'd be sweating it out. Like we would see Donnie Nelson walk into his office. I'm like, man, I hope it's not the day. It's sort of like being on Green Mile, right?
Yeah, that's funny.
But so you got to keep them motivated, but you got to keep them relevant. And relevancy as a player isn't just making these 9 dribble ISO, step back jumpers and trying to be like James Harden and Steph Curry. Those guys are the best bad shot makers of all time. And they can do that because they're built to make shots like that. The problem is you've got guys that can't even get on JV floors trying to do that. Instead of look, to get in the game, you need to be able to do this.
The Head Start Basketball Holiday Camp for boys and girls in grades 1 through 6 will be held on December 26th and 27th. Join us for 2 fun days of basketball fundamentals, contests, and small-sided games. You can find more information or get registered at headstartbasketball.com.
I know I keep going on those tangents, but I think
no, it's totally. I think it's totally relevant. I think that when you think about player development and you think about it from a standpoint of, let's say, again, working out, I'm taking what you said from the NBA and dropping it down a level or two, and thinking about how when you work with a middle school or a high school kid, the reason why I think trainers and coaches put the ball in their hands is because that's what kids want to have, right? They want to have the ball in their hands. They don't want to work on They don't want to work on a hard screen and then roll into the basket. They don't want to work on the footwork of how to get open or how to set a flare screen and then pop back out, and then do a straight line drive. They don't necessarily want to work on that stuff. And then I think goes back to what you said right at the very beginning, as a coach or as a trainer, in order to feel confident teaching that stuff, you have to put some time in to understand what it is that you're teaching, whether that's from a footwork standpoint or a timing standpoint, or again, we could go into all the nitty-gritty details as much as we wanted. But the bottom line is that I think it's more difficult to teach that stuff because you just don't see it as often. And then two, I think that from a player standpoint, to be able to convince a player and their parent that, hey, you're paying me $50 an hour, and now what, my kid only has the ball for 5 minutes out of out of that hour while we're working on it, that doesn't seem like I'm getting my money's worth. And yet I think when you think about communication, which has kind of been the theme of what we've been talking about, throughout the night here, if you can communicate that to people that, look, if you can develop these skills, you're going to be valuable on whatever team you play on at whatever level. And I think that's what gets lost in all the crazy dribble moves and all the other things that you see online.
Right. And I think that I probably wouldn't, like in an hour workout, if I was working out a player, I wouldn't have 55 minutes of just cutting and doing all those.
Right. For sure.
You have this routine of shots that they'll take, but I'd do about 5 minutes of ISO or if I was working out this regular player that was an average player as a wing, right? What I would work over them, spot up shooting, obviously. The biggest thing for me would be being able to catch and go from the wing without traveling and splitting their feet, which 90% of players at all levels do. And until you actually tell them about footwork and teach them how to slow it down and drive off their front foot and keep their back foot down until they dribble it, and really have just these spots on the floor they could be effective from, and then work on the 4 or 5 minutes of isolation moves to make them feel good. But little things like left hand, floater, how to screen, how to drive without traveling, spot up shooting, maybe a jab and how to jab correctly and keep the ball protected, how to finish and things like that, instead of dominating all this ball handling and all this nonsense that they're not going to do. The problem with it, even if you break it down, you watch, now James Harden's a big time ISO player. His percentages of times he gets the ball where he ISOs is big. But if you watch most of these players, LeBron, Kawhi Leonard, Anthony Davis, some of the best players in the game, yeah, they ISO about 15, 20% of the time, give or take. Most of the basketball plays that they make, spot ups, drives, post ups, transition. We talked about straight line driving. They're not elbow catches and just sort of catch and shoot, catch and drive it. They're just sort of simple basketball plays. The problem with today's player is they work on 95% of the things. 95% of the time they work on things they'll do 2% of the time or 1% of the time. And that's the problem. Instead of making simple basketball reads and plays, they can't do that. And I understand making it a little exciting for the person who's paying you and all that, but you got to put it in perspective too. But look, this is what you need to do to, master to, that's why I hate catchphrases. I hate cliches. You'll never hear me say downhill or anything like that, because I'm not a big cliche guy, but I do like one, and I call it dominate simple. And if you could dominate simple and you're really great at that, a one simple thing, and then build off that, you could become a pretty good player. And instead of trying to be, average or at best at being an ISO player, how about being great at straight line driving, or great at screening, or great at dribble kicks and respacing? I don't know. I just sort of had that instilled with me with these people. Like Herb Livesey would always tell me, because again, he's coming from the scouting background. He's obviously player development, but he was like, look, you got to develop one skill to get this player in the game. And I never forgot that. And every player that I work with, I'll always tell them, look, we got to get you this one skill that's going to get you in a game. And then once your coach has trust in you to play you on a regular basis, now we could start working on skill 2, skill 3 and all that. But right now, let's just dominate this one simple thing, whatever it is.
Love that. And I want to piggyback on that and ask you, as we think about, and we've talked about it a little bit tonight, about the system that we have today in terms of basketball, and we've talked to some other coaches in the past, and I think that kids today are more skilled, and by skilled I mean if you give them a ball and ask them to dribble it and show off their ball handling moves, they're more skilled than a kid was 30 years ago.
Sure.
And if you just put a kid in an empty gym and put the gun or the Dr. Dish in front of them and fire balls at them, I think there are more kids that can shoot the ball better today than there were 30 years ago.
Agreed.
But I'm not convinced that kids are better basketball players today or have a higher basketball IQ. So the question I would ask you is, as a player development coach, how do you work on, sure, you can work on those skills. So how do you work on developing a player's IQ when you're working with them?
Well, you do a little, first of all, you talk about it just like anything else. You talk about what's going to happen. Your goal as a player is to get 2 defenders on the ball. So that could be off a pick and roll. That could be off a straight line drive where you get your defender on their hip and someone has to rotate up, and you talk about it. Now, I think Kevin McHale is a pretty good friend of mine. I've known Kevin a long time, and he told me through the 80s when they were rolling in Boston, they would play a lot of 2-on-2 and 3-on-3 after practice. And I think playing a lot of 2-on-2 and 3-on-3, especially 3-on-3, because you could get that help defender in rotations and fire out and scramble and things like that. I think if you play, the more you can play. So you talk about, just like a skill, you talk about it first, you walk through it. If you're working a player out by themselves, I mean, it's hard to imagine. Maybe if you have, like we had 12 player development interns in Dallas, so we could have dummy defenders and things. But then I think the best way they're going to know is by getting in a game and doing it. So I think if you could play as much 3-on-3 as you can, and then 4-on-4, 5-on-5 in scrimmage. But again, you got to start slow, talk to them about it, tell them about it, even watch film about it. But again, I'm a big believer in a player has to make mistakes in games. So you could work them out all you want. You could, watch as much film, more film than Steven Spielberg will watch. You could do all that. But if they're not in a game making mistakes, and they're not going to be worth a damn. You got to be able to get in a game and make mistakes. But if you could have the luxury of playing 3-on-3, that's great, and have them do some of these things and then talk about it. Don't be one of those coaches that stop every play, but have those controlled 3-on-3 environments where maybe you put them in a situation and then you say, okay, play out of this situation. Maybe it's maybe you have them a pin down. You got a point guard that you set a pin down and then you play out of that. I never forget, Herb Livesey was the director of player development at the CBA, and they had this combine in the CBA. It was the best combine I ever heard about. They would have the guys work out. They put them on teams. This is at the end of the year where NBA teams. This is this is the older version of the D League, and they would have all these NBA executives come and watch the best players in the D League. I forgot. I'm in the CBA. I forgot how many players they invited. Maybe 45 players, and then they would work them out. But they would have 3-on-3. And Herb actually gave me the index cards. I wish I still had it. And they would put these guys in these situations like cross screen. Play out of a cross screen, play out of a pin down, play out of a pick and roll, play out of this and that, flex action. And I think if you again, you teach the skill, you go slow with it, then you more game speed, then you actually put them in a situation like that where, it's going to be an actual game situation, not just a 3-on-3 where, you give it to one person, put your head down and play. We actually put them in a game situation, coach the situation up, and then correct them when they make mistakes. I think that's the player's going to get better from that. And I think, again, another thing I'm big on is repetition, correction, and repeat. Get the player reps, correct them in 15-second sound bites. Don't give them the Iliad or the Odyssey when you're trying to correct them because their attention spans aren't great anyway. But you get them reps. They make a mistake, you correct it in 15. You put them right back in, and you let them keep doing it. And I think, but I think playing a lot of basketball, a lot of 3-on-3, a lot of 4-on-4, I think that they'll get better at it in time. Some players just aren't they're tunnel vision scorers, or they just don't have great vision or great feel, and you could do that until they're green in the face. They're still not going to be really good at it. But they could, you could continue to try to, again, you got to hit singles in this thing. Don't try to hit home runs, because most of player development is single, 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 and then maybe you could stretch it out to a double once in a while, but not a lot of home runs in player development. It's a lot of, it's like, Andy Dufresne and Shawshank, where you're putting just a little bit of gravel outside of your jeans every day for 30 years until you can escape from prison. You got to build it over time. It's not going to, don't be in a rush on this, or you're not going to be good, and you're going to put the kid in a bad situation.
Yeah, so true. I mean, I think that it's progress. It slowly happens over time. Mm-hmm. And I love what you said about 3-on-3. And I've stumped on the podcast here for kids, especially, again, younger kids, playing more 3-on-3, where they get more touches, more opportunity to be involved in, as you said, real live game situations where they're screening, or you're playing out of, different sets that you might actually see in a game. And then it becomes more realistic when they get out there and play 5-on-5, and yet they're touching the ball way more, and they're involved in more defensive rotations, and just everybody's involved in the play when you play 3-on-3. And so whenever, I'm talking to youth coaches or myself when I'm coaching my own kids, mm-hmm. You try to design your practices around those things where, you're playing a lot of 2-on-2, you're playing a lot of 3-on-3. And I had the opportunity to go out and be at Snow Valley. Jason and I went out there this summer for the first time, and it was phenomenal, as you know. And, just to see Cutthroat, up close and personal, and how, that was run there at Snow Valley, and then bringing that back here and using it with some of the teams and players that I've been able to work with. And I just think, to me, there's no better player development game as far as IQ and developing your skills than that. And I just think that if you can put all that together with, as you said, the repetition, and then the correction, and then repeating it, and just giving kids the amount of reps that they're making, and they're making quality reps, that's how you end up developing players and making them better. And I think that transcends whatever level you want to talk about.
Mm-hmm. I agree. I think Cutthroat is a great thing. I first saw it first time was in Santa Barbara with Herb and those guys at Snow Valley, and then getting a chance to work with in Iowa, for the last 5 or 6, 7 years. Be able to see it there up close, and those kids, and just correcting them and teaching them about moving the ball. Everybody's got to touch it, and catching the ball and squaring up, and having rules and good spacing, and don't be one of those coaches that just yells out space, space, space. Because you don't even know what it means half the time anyway. But actually coaching the kids on spacing and what the advantages are on the offensive and the defensive end, how it impacts you. They do a great job with that. It's the best teaching camp in the country. I think if I'm a coach, or I'm a kid that's anywhere from like 10 on and 17, that's the camp that I want to go to. Yeah, it used to be 5-star, in Snow Valley out in California. Obviously, those things are gone by the wayside, and Snow Valley in Iowa, you gotta go to, because it's a great environment to learn. They have great teachers there, instructors, and they care, and it's all basketball. It's a great environment for players.
Yeah, it's awesome. We when we went out there, we got it from all different perspectives, because obviously we were coaching, so we got to see it from that perspective. And then I brought my son with me and got a chance. He's in 8th grade, and so he got a chance to participate in it. So I got to see it from a parent, and then I got to hear my son's perspective as a player. And in all aspects, we just came away just so impressed with every single aspect of it. And so we're thankful for Coach Showalter inviting us, and Coach Schlaubaugh for putting up with us while we were there. And it was just we had a blast, and we definitely have it on the on the schedule every year. As long as they'll keep having us back, we're going to try to make it out there at least one session every summer going forward. So it was fantastic.
Sure.
Let's talk a little bit about what you have going with Hoop Consultants. Talk a little bit about how you're trying to impact the game through developing coaches with that, and what else you have going on right now.
Sure. So sort of at the tail end of my career with Tim Grover, Attack in Chicago, I got a chance to work with Kobe Bryant for 4 years, and it was a great experience, like breaking down film for him and giving him sort of my input on what he's doing, what he's not doing. He wanted to know all this information, so I started thinking, like, this might be a pretty cool thing to sort of instruct coaches with, and being able to work with a player like that and all types of players and how to develop players and talk to players about development and things. So, I've been doing it off and on for about 10 years, and now I really didn't think it was a great thing to do full time while I was with the Mavericks, Dallas, because you never really want to be put in a position like, why are you doing this and not being with our guys all the time? So what I'm going to start getting into is, putting on webinars and instructional videos and instructional sessions and one-on-one consultation with players and coaches out of all realms of basketball, how to deal with certain things, talking about topics, webinars on topics, ebooks on topics. And I'm sort of going to launch that close to the first of the year, relaunch it actually. And I think it'll have an impact on how to help the coaches work with the players. And our game's so saturated with workout guys and things like that, and I didn't really want to touch on that much. I want to really get into the consultation of coaches and put on these classes and these webinars, because I think it's a great teaching tool, and be able to Skype in with players and coaches and parents and talk about things, and sort of from my perspective of dealing with every type of player, and again, being able to take average players and turn them into rotation players. And I think, being able to do that, if you're able to do that at a high level, I think you could be good anywhere in the world coaching this game. And I really want to give back, and I think it's a great way to do it. And in conjunction with that, I'm also was named basketball brand ambassador with a company called BSN Sports out of Dallas, Texas. And BSN Sports is probably, how to describe them, the number one supplier of athletic gear to high schools and colleges across the country. So we deal with, I don't want to get the numbers wrong, but about 80,000 high schools and colleges across the country, selling them anything from uniforms to sneakers to gym equipment to scoreboards. And what they want to do is they send me across the country to high schools all over the place to put on these clinics, these free coaching clinics to anyone who signs up. And basically I'll put on, and we'll have a couple other coaches with me sometimes, and talk about topics in basketball, put on this clinic for 2 to 3 hours, where on the court, we do PowerPoint presentations, do the Q&As as long as they want, and it's totally free of charge. And they also get their extra hours, their teaching hours, because sometimes coaches need a certain amount of hours throughout the year to, where they're learning and going to classes and things. So it's a great opportunity for coaches. They don't have to pay all this money to go to these coaching clinics. The biggest thing with coaches clinics, I think a problem, and I think it's going to be a big problem until most of them are gone, are these coaches that aren't making a lot of money have to pay all this money to, travel, eat, hotel, and then pay for the clinic. And so sometimes you're paying $800, $1,000 to go to like a Las Vegas or LA or Florida for these clinics. And sometimes you might have these coaches who tell stories. Sometimes they'll do a good job. A lot of times, I remember going to these clinics, and where we're there and we're seeing this high major coach, I'm there with friends and seeing these high major coaches draw up these plays for their 6'11", 6'10", and 7-foot front court. And my boy's taking down notes. I said, "What are you doing?" He goes, "Well, I'm taking down these notes." I said, "Look, his front court's 6'10", 6'11", 7'1". 3 of your front court players combined can't get on Space Mountain and Disney World. What are you doing? You're not going to use this stuff." So we take that in consideration with the BSN clinics, where we want to provide as much value to everyone there, where everyone could use the content that we're bringing to them. And our big thing is we answer as many questions as there are. And sometimes there are clinics with 25 people, sometimes there's 100 people. And BSN does a great job being the leader of free coaching clinics across the country. And, I like doing it. I like interacting with high school coaches and talking and trying to give them ideas and concepts to help their team. And again, I'm talking to a team, an average high school team, a JV coach from Iowa. I want to make sure that they get out there with, they leave with 20, 25 pages of notes of things that maybe they could use 80% of it with their teams, 85. I don't think you should really try to be teaching things you do with NBA players to high school coaches, where, most of them, what do they want? They want drills. They want plays. They like some stories and stuff, no question. But, I think you got to give them as much value as you can. So
yeah, you want takeaways. I think that's the thing. Whenever I go to a clinic, I always want takeaways. I want things that, yeah, I like to be entertained as much as anybody else,
mm-hmm.
but when I get done, I want to have, as you said, a notebook full of things that I can go back and look back over my notes and say, okay, yeah, this is something that I want to incorporate into what we do. And those takeaways to me are always key. Mike, give people your contact information. Tell them how they can find out more about what you're doing, both with Hoop Consultants and with BSN and the clinics. And then after you do that, if there's anything else that we didn't hit on tonight that you want to share with us before we get out, go ahead and do that, and then we'll jump back in and wrap up the episode.
Yeah, sure. I mean, you can contact me at mike@hoopconsultants.com, but that's my email. You could follow me on Twitter at Hoop Consultants. I usually do some coaching talks, on Twitter and sort of question answer. Again, my website's going to be redesigned probably by the middle of December, close to the first of the year. So I'll start launching that. And again, they could reach me. Email's good. You could hit me up on Twitter. That's the best way. And then the BSN Sports, just go to bsnsports.com. There's a links to coaching clinics and things. And again, we're probably going to do. I'm leaving for Connecticut tomorrow, and that'll be the last clinic that we do for this calendar year. But come April, May, the summer, and next fall, and before the season starts, we're probably going to be in about 40 to 60 cities, across the country next year. And they really want to, again, spread the word and try to educate coaches as much as possible. So yeah, go to the website. If you can't find it for some reason, just hit me up on Twitter or hit me up on my email, and I'd love to handle it as best as I can. As far as things that you missed, there's really not a lot. I mean, my work with Kobe was interesting. Just like I said, I mean, it was a pretty cool deal how I got sort of started with that. I remember it was like it was yesterday. So it's January, and they have this article in the New York Times about Daryl Morey and the Houston Rockets. And Daryl, I worked with Daryl in Boston, and he was at the Celtics for a couple of years, and then he went to Houston to become their GM. And he's the father of analytics of the NBA. And he had this. They had this New York Times article about how they have this like Secretary of Defense thing that like Obama would have. They would give to Shane Battier how to defend Kobe, and they would have all these numbers of where he struggled from and all this stuff. And I guess statistically, Kobe would struggle against Houston the last 6 to 8 games they played. And so I talked to Tim, Grover, who was working with Kobe at the time, rehabbing his knee and working with, traveling with him. And I said, hey, do you guys know about this article? And I don't think it was a big deal at the time. There was no Twitter really back then. So I was like, oh, yeah, I'll let him know. So I didn't really hear anything about it. And coincidentally, I go to visit Kevin McHale at his house in Minnesota. He was coaching the Timberwolves at the time. And I stayed with him, and we were hanging out, going to games and practices. And I get this email, and it's from Tim Grover. And he's like, hey, look, Kobe's going to be hitting you up. And he read this article, and he wants to know, if this is true. And, I said, you sure he wants to talk to me about it? And he goes, because there's about 8,000 people. He's got a Hall of Fame coach. Like, you sure? And he goes, yeah, don't worry about it. Just whatever. So about an hour later, I get this email and said, hey, it's Kobe Bryant. It's Kobe. Look, I need you to get to the bottom of this. I heard you're connected a little bit. And I'm like, I need to know, like, so I can combat this. I'm like, cool, that's fine. So, I talked to Kevin. I talked to my friends that were assistant coaches, advanced scouts, and they just told me these not BS answers, but these like answers that anyone would do. Force him into tough shots, this and that.
Right.
And I'm like, look, if I bring this to this guy, I'll never hear from him again. And not that I thought this was going to be any type of a career or anything. And so I'm like, all right, let me just go to Synergy. Let me watch these games and let me get some things. So I watch about 6 to 7 games. And basically, Van Gundy was the coach. Battier was doing a hell of a job guarding. Basically, they, 4 guys that rotate over on the help. They had Yao Ming in there. That was like a wall. You couldn't stop him, right? So like Kobe would, dribble into it, try to finish over Yao all the time. Yao, Battier did a great job funneling the baseline, kept him out of the middle, stayed on his feet, so Kobe couldn't get to the free throw line on his fakes. So he would struggle, and I'll be watching. They just got Gasol within the last year, so I'm like, look, all these guys are open. There's 4 guys on you. So I was like, all right, let me just do it this way. So I gave him this report. It was like 3 to 4 pages, and it was like everything that he was doing wrong. And it wasn't like anything specific that Houston was doing. Basically, he loved to take tough shots. That was his thing. And he had, my biggest takeaways was, look, you got Trevor Ariza wide open in the corner. You would never give it to him early where he would isolate or do whatever because he wasn't built like that. But spot up threes and straight line drives and dribble kicks to him. And also you got Gasol there, at the elbow, especially in the triangle when you drove. So he's your outlet as well. So you got to give these 2 guys the ball. Secondly, you take all these tough shots. You got to limit those things, especially unless it's late game clock, late shot clock. And then with Yao, you got to have him step away from the paint, and he can't move his feet. They were like literally like cinder blocks for legs. And I said, look, you got to move them right to left. And because they're going to have Battier, they have Artest. They're going to have guys draped all over you. They're not going to leave your feet. They're going to try to rough you up, so you're not going to get to the free throw line a lot. If you take these fadeaway jumpers and try to finish over Yao, who's 22 feet tall, you're not going to be able to do it. Here's what I think you should do. And I do this, and then I tell Mikhail what I said, and Kevin's the best. He goes, you sure you want to do it that way? And I go, look, I said, it's not like Brian Scalabrine asking me for advice. This is Kobe Bryant, right? This is, whatever. I'm going to give him the truth and see what happens. So I sent it to him. The game's on national TV. I remember it because the Timberwolves had some function. And I was in this banquet room with a small room in the Target Center somewhere. And I'm watching this, and Kobe has 36. And the game came down to, as luck would have it, this isolation, Artest was on him, and Yao stepped out. I don't know if it was a pick and roll or whatever. Yao stepped away from the paint. Perfect scenario. Instead of trying to jump over him and finish, he just crossed him over, got to the lane with no problem. And I'm and Mikhail goes, you think you're going to ever hear from him again? I go, fuck no, I'm not going to hear from him again. But it's Kobe Bryant. It's not Brian Scalabrine. No offense to Scal. But I said, and he starts laughing. Well, he gets interviewed on TNT, and it's literally 90 seconds after that, I get an email saying, hey, we got San Antonio or Dallas tomorrow. I think it was San Antonio tomorrow. I need the same thing. So basically, before every game, the night before, the morning of the game, I would give him video of the person who's guarding him, the backup, and the backup to the backup. So 3 guys that were guarding him, all their strengths and weaknesses defensively. Do they close their stance, open stance? Do they leave their feet? And then who he's guarding, and then what their weaknesses were, where their strengths were. Video on them, video on turnovers, video on good plays, bad plays, and then sort of any type of other intel I could get. Shot zones from every one of those players, where they're hot from, where they're cold from, the statistical, do they go right, do they go left? I mean, I got that every game to him, game day. Now, again, I was in Chicago, he was in LA, so I'll be doing this, and it was funny and scary at the same time. I had his ringer, and we would never talk. We would never really talk. We would always just email and text. That's how I wanted it. I don't want to develop a relationship with anybody that I work with like that. I just wanted to keep it business-like, and so he would email, and he would have the old Knight Rider swoosh of, I don't know if you watch Knight Rider, but
I know the sound.
Yeah, so that would be haunting my dreams at 3:30 in the morning because it's the 2-hour difference of Chicago. And my wife was like, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "Honey, I got to take care of this." And so I'd be talking to him half the night, then have to do this report and give it to him by 8 a.m. or 9 a.m. my time, which was 6 a.m. his time. And the first couple of weeks I did it, and then I was like, let me check. And I remember this. It was Philadelphia he was playing, and I didn't send it to him purposely. And he was I would get 5 of these texts or emails being hey, you all right? What's going on? Da, 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 da. So I know I purposely didn't send it to him where I want to know if he was, hearing it or not, looking at it or not. Right. And it was like that. And then I would give him a post-game report of what I thought he could have done better, what I thought he did well, and what have you, in any other chit chat we would have. So we did that for 4 years in a row, and it was pretty cool. I did that from like '08 to like 12, and then I got the job with the Mavericks for like I ended it, and then I remember I telling him, look, I don't want to be your friend. This is just business. I'm not going to ask you for shoes, tickets, any of that stuff. I'm not trying to take pictures with you, go out with you, all that stuff. I got a job to do. This is what we'll do. I'll be with you 24/7. And it was a pretty cool deal. And I said, look, I know when you don't answer me on a text or an email, I know we're done and we're good, and I'm good with it. But I know there's no, I'm not going to get invested in this like this where I'm going to get upset or whatever. I know there's going to come a time where, where this is going to end. And it did. And it was a fantastic opportunity. He ended up giving me a championship ring in 2010 when he won it. And
that's awesome.
Yeah, it was a great experience. Awesome. But being able to work with a player like that and seeing how dedicated he was. And I remember I got a chance to work him out a few times. And the first time I worked him out, we were at UC Irvine at his camp. He was one of the original Nike Skill Academies out in LA and at Mater Dei High School. And I remember the guy that was with him texted me like, hey, you want to, Kobe wants you to work him out. I'm like, great. And he was like, all right, workout will start at like 5. So that's great. I said, like, we have dinner at like 6 or whatever, so I'll just miss that. He goes, no. It was 5 a.m. And so like the car picked me up at like 4:30, got UC Irvine 4:45. He's already there. We worked out for like 2 hours. It was me, him, and Chase Budinger working out. And then after that, I was like, hey, what's going on? Like, what are you doing after this? He goes, well, this is what I'm doing. I go, I'm going to eat a little bit. Then I got to weights. I'm going to eat. I got yoga. I got to stretch. I do martial arts. And then I take a nap. And then I'm going to do some track work. And then I'm like, well, you going to work out like tomorrow or whatever? And he goes, yeah, but, you could come if you want, but it's going to be no ball, all defense, 2 hours, rotations, closeouts, sprints, all that stuff. And I'm not touching the ball tomorrow. So right then I knew, I said, look, that guy's the best player, in the league right now. And this guy's doing this, and this is the summer. And,
right. There's a reason why the best are the best, right?
Yeah. It just teaches me about being invested in the game. So when I'm working with role players, and I never really pull the Kobe card at all, because I think that's tacky to just like mention him, all the time.
Right.
So my thing is like, look, you got to be invested, especially at an NBA player. You've got to be invested. You got to be a professional. You got to be early to everything. You got to be watching that film. You got to be able to be coached when that coach is telling you something you don't want to hear, but like telling you what you're doing wrong. You gotta instead of being like, why is he picking on me? Like, okay, I got to correct it. And the thing about Kobe, for 4 years, he never said anything negative about Phil. It was nothing like, he never really made excuses like that. Now he would come at, like, he would say, certain teammates weren't giving it. They're all on certain nights and stuff, but, frustrated like anybody else would be. But he never, you don't see that today. You see a lot of people going against their coach. You always respect coaching. A lot like MJ, always respect coaching, always respected authority. He just sort of wanted to give it his all every night.
That's awesome. That is a fantastic story to wrap up. We can't thank you enough for spending an hour and a half with us tonight, Mike. I feel like there was just a tremendous amount of value for coaches out there who might be listening, plus some entertaining stories to go along with it. So we really appreciate you jumping on with us. And to everyone out there, we will catch you on our next episode. Thanks.
Thanks for listening to the Hoop Heads podcast, presented by Head Start Basketball.